travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late-night shifts. What's your scary story, and why? Shortly after graduating high school, I started working at a fast food place in rural Washington. One night we had a huge line of customers right up until close, so doing all of our closing stuff took later than usual. By the time my coworkers finished, I was almost done. But it was already almost midnight, so I told them I could stay and lock up. About 5 minutes after they both left, I heard a knock on the back door and I was about to open it when I remembered something. If it was one of my CO workers, they wouldn't have knocked. They would have seen my car in the parking lot, assumed I was still there, and just walked in. So this of course has made me wonder who would want to be coming into an obviously closed fast food place at this hour. So I asked, "What do you want?" in the manliest voice 19-year-old me could possibly muster. After that I hear the sound of footsteps just taking off. At this point I gained the courage to look outside, and I see the outline of a man darting down a back street. A few seconds later I heard the sound of an engine from that direction. I decided fuck this and locked up and left as quick as possible. A few days later someone was arrested for trying, and failing, luckily, to break into my other co-worker's house. News seemed to imply that there was evidence he had been stalking her, and while I never got a clear answer about how true that was, it disturbed me, because I had been covering that same CO worker's shift that night. Coming out of Death Valley on a cross-country road trip, nature called and I asked my friend to pull into a gas station. It was a sketchy place and the bathroom was an infectious disease gold mine, so I decided to go back to the car and wait a few more miles. On the way back, I hear someone say, "Nice shirt" to me. I was wearing a band tee, so I assumed it was a fan. Nope, clearly a druggie. He asks for cash and I wave him off, but he follows. I get to my car, let myself in the passenger side, and lock the door. Guy had a knife up his sleeve. He taped the window with it before we sped off. I sometimes think how that could have gone differently if my friend didn't have the door unlocked, or if I was alone, or if the guy was faster to the draw. Hiking in the woods of Van Georgia and I ran into a massive black bear on the trail. He ran off, but I saw him 15 minutes later. He runs off. I see him again. He runs off. I sit down to eat. Bear comes back. I throw rocks and he runs off. I keep moving down the trail. Run into a hiker coming the other way. He tells me bears are up ahead and wants to camp with me. I tell him bears are behind me and I want to camp with him. In the morning, I hike up the trail for 10 minutes and see 2 bears. Keep hiking. See another bear. Bears everywhere. I work as a paramedic and went to a mental health call in an apartment block. Police were also on scene with us as it was a very rough area with lots of assaults. We were assessing her and halfway through assessment she went out on the apartment balcony to have a cigarette, and we could hear her talking to her male neighbor on a separate balcony next to hers. She finished her cigarette and came down to the ambulance with us. She was talking to herself a bit and then started responding to herself in the same male voice we could hear when she was out on the balcony. It was utterly convincing. When me and my sister were teenagers, we were on a road trip with our parents in the mountains of British Columbia, Canada. It was the middle of the night and we pulled over to a rest stop for a break. It was pitch black. No towns anywhere nearby, just trees and mountains. My mom was driving and had reclined her seat for a nap, then decided to get out of the car for a minute, probably to stretch. She jumped back in the car and said she heard someone. I remember my dad kind of laughing because we were in the middle of nowhere. She turned on the headlights and there was a man standing right in front of the car. Seat still reclined. She started the car and drove off so fast. It was terrifying. No idea why he was there, but we didn't stick around to find out. Working night shift for a few weeks with a coworker who had fallen ill. He apparently had hepatitis from a blood transfusion that he'd gotten years and years before. He was a Vietnam veteran that survived multiple gunshot wounds. Basically, the job was to watch him in the event that something bad happened. So, over the course of a week or two, I watched him slowly die. His stomach ballooned up to look pregnant and he would nod off over and over. Most of the time he was slow to respond, so it scared the shit out of me that he had slipped into a coma or died. Thankfully there at the end, they told him he needed to stay home for liability reasons, and he ended up going to the hospital shortly after. He died a few days after that. It was sad and terrifying to watch him go that way. My creepiest experience happened when I was 20 and ended up teaching me a good lesson. I was driving alone on 95 in the deep south at 1 a.m. when I almost ran out of gas. I took the next exit for a station. The station ended up being 15 or so minutes from the highway. The station had zero lights, completely in the middle of the woods, and the only person around was the employee. As I was pumping gas, a pickup truck full of some really rough-looking guys piled in the back, swearing drunk, going nuts. It was a scene straight out of Deliverance. I kept my head down and was praying I wouldn't end up being kidnapped. All of a sudden one of the guys shouted, "Boys, look who is next to us." All heads turned to me. The biggest guy then said, "There is a lady present, guys," then proceeded to profusely apologize for cursing in my presence. The rest did the same. Lesson learned: don't judge a book by its cover. Probably the politest guys I have encountered to this day. In the construction industry, and I've seen a lot of things, but one story still keeps me up at night. I was on a job where they were remodeling this old hospital campus. It was a huge complex that had been abandoned since the early 1970s. It was so big that it had sustained impressive animal population for some time. It was common to see deer, foxes, and skunks running around. One day, I was walking back to my car and I saw a deer with half an antler run into a building that we hadn't remodeled yet. The next day, I was walking to another part of the job site with a piece of paper I need to document for auditing reasons. It flew out of my hand and into an open window of the same building I saw the deer run into the day before. I peeked into the window and saw the paper lying on the floor. I did a quick once-over of the room, for safety, climbed through the window and into the room. Once I retrieved the paper, I smelled a weird smell coming from the adjacent room. I took a quick peek, and saw the mangled carcass of the deer with half an antler I saw the day before. At that exact same moment I hear the sound of something large and heavy coming up the stairs. It was also groaning and puffing. Needless to say, I noped out of there, and practically jumped out the window. I grabbed my stuff and ran to the job site. I told the head project manager about the ordeal, and he relayed it to animal control. I wasn't there for that much longer, literally a day, but I heard they closed down the site for a couple of days. I also heard that they did find something, and it was some kind of big cat not native to the area. To this day I think about how I was almost cat food. Back in the 90s I was a test driver for one of the big three at a prototype test facility. We tested their prototype cars and trucks for durability, new technology, etc. I worked the graveyard shift because it paid more. Some tests were on grounds and some tests were highway miles. One route required going way out in the desert, was in Arizona, to an abandoned gold mining town from the early 1900s. It was in the middle of the mountains, was on a very treacherous, narrow road. Think narrow lanes, drop-off cliffs with no guardrails, and extremely tricky switchbacks. Lots of the graveyard drivers, including myself, saw and heard lots of weird shit out there at night. Rumor was mostly UFO type stuff, weird lights, etc. Well, one night I was heading back to grounds, and I came up on top of the pass and was heading into 8 miles of 15 miles per hour max switchbacks and drop-off cliffs. It was extremely dangerous to be on this road if you were sleepy. I pulled over to step out and get some fresh air to make sure I was alert. It was about 3 a.m. Got back in the truck and started into the switchbacks, and that's the last thing I remember until 8 miles later when I snapped to and realized I was at Cool Springs, which was the end of the switchbacks. I had absolutely zero memory of driving for the last 20-25 minutes. I was so freaked out about how I could have possibly driven that without driving off a cliff that I was shaking so bad I had to pull over until I calmed down. I don't think I fell asleep. There's no way I could have driven that road asleep. More than one person has run off the cliffs there and died, but to this day I have no memory of that run. I've traveled and lived in more places than just about anyone I know, and have had a lot of memorably sketchy moments. People, animals, storms went out in the elements, getting lost, and of course the unexplained sounds and etc. Most heart-stopping 5 seconds was the time I was on a lonely road in Alaska, by myself, late at night. Stupid to even be out there, but I was stupid at that time. Wintertime, Aurora Borealis. Stepped out of my car and walked a few meters to take it all in. Dark otherwise, no moon, was staring up at the sky, admiring the show, when the absolute frozen silence was broken by the sounds of very heavy footsteps crunching through the snow behind me. 2, 3 footsteps and then a pause. I was in the car and gone before I took my next breath, and another that was maybe not the scariest, but one of the most memorable, was simply when I walked into a motel that I shouldn't have. It was off some side road in the middle of nowhere somewhere in the southwest US. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't meant for people to be staying. But I couldn't tell just from the front desk. It was old and decrepit. But so what? So I paid and got my key, went around back, then it started changing, walked past the room with its door open, with 3 scary dudes and a couple of pit bulls chained up. They all stared as I went past. My room was up the rickety stairs, so I climbed up. No lights, clearly nobody staying anywhere on the floor. Walked past doors just open to the elements, swinging open. Dark rooms exposed. Most doors were open. Mine was locked. Got to it and decided I'd seen enough. Dropped the key in the key drop and was fucking gone. Not ashamed to say I didn't ask for a refund. Sometimes you have to know when to just flat out run, as this was in the desert with nothing else around for miles, and everyone in that motel including those 3 dudes knew I was by myself and from out of state. It was time to go. Had a hard time keeping my eyes on the road for a long time. Kept watching that rearview mirror. That person at the front desk had a gun on their hip. Now that I think about it. Years ago I was hiking in a national park. They told us that there were moose. Very territorial moose. Avoid the moose if you can. Well, I had woken up around 4 a.m. in this campsite we were staying at. I really had to go to the bathroom. I'd been having some stomach issues, so it wasn't something I could put off. So I grabbed my headlamp, prayed I'd find my way back from the outhouse to our campsite, and headed out. The weather was uneventful but nerve-wracking. It's dark as hell. The grass is tall. We're next to a shoreline. I finish my business and leave the outhouse. My way back to the campsite has me go parallel to the shoreline. As I'm walking, I hear the water moving in time with me. At first, I think it's just waves, then it becomes clear it's something large stepping through the water, in time with me. I turn to look, and I saw the dim light of my headlamp reflect in the eyes of something bigger and taller than me. Something in my head told me not to run, that I didn't want to freak it out and have a pissed off animal chasing after me. So I just speed walked back to the camp and got in my bag and barricaded the shelter door. Apparently people in the wee hours of the morning saw a large bull moose hanging out right where I had been walking. It chilled for a bit and went on its merry way. Absolutely scary in the dark though. I'm a young woman and I love to travel alone, though I rarely do because of how dangerous it is. One day when I was living in Paris, I decided I needed to get out of the city and took a train to a nearby giant park, small forest, and was really enjoying myself just walking around listening to music. I stayed on some bigger trails with lots of people. Then this one man walked past me and looked me up and down and gave me the creepiest look I've ever seen. I kept walking and looked behind me in time to see him do a complete 180 and start following me. I got a little freaked out and started walking faster and suddenly realized the trail was pretty empty. I turned down a different path, partly to see if he was following me, partly to find more people. He turned down the path after me. I got really freaked out and picked up my pace. So did he. The path suddenly turned a corner and I was able to duck behind a tree. The man kept going down the path and I hid behind the tree for a while. He then came back down the path, obviously looking for me. I was able to run away and find a nice old French couple to walk with me back to the train station. I know this doesn't seem huge, but to a young woman traveling and living alone, I hate to imagine what could have happened if that man had gotten me. While I was hiking in the Black Forest, Germany, I was on the way back to the house I was staying after I misjudged the time and had to walk the last kilometers in the dark. Let's say the Black Forest has its name for a reason. Even at the day it can be hard to see, but after the sun went down you can't see shit. So I was trying to follow the road and not accidentally run off a cliff when I suddenly get the feeling of being watched. As I said, I can't see shit and it's also in the middle of the forest behind the last mountain, so there can't really be anyone there. Anyway, I continue walking while keeping an eye out for anything suspicious, or at least trying. This continues until the road makes a sharp turn, and after going the new direction for a few meters, I notice a very strong smell. I smoke and my sense of smell isn't great, but it still hit me pretty strong. I guessed that it had to be a boar with her younglings, so I get even more nervous, but I had a few encounters with some before, so wasn't too concerned. But I still have the feeling that something of the smell and the silence was off. Boars are loud, so normally you can hear them way before you smell them. Anyway, I continued and reached the house. Didn't think too much of it until the next morning. I hear at the radio that in exactly the area I was going through, an unusually aggressive wolf was seen by multiple people. Guy, firefighter for years, and I am built like a tank, just shy of 2 meters tall. Part of my daily routine, I go for a run. Walk every day to basically get myself awake and loosen up, so I'm on leave and in Canada. Never been here before, so I am really excited to go for a run in the early morning. I get about 5 kilometers down a track and I realize I have no idea where I actually am. The track is a loop, but it's all new, so I'm effectively in the woods in a strange country, and if I get off the track I'm in deep shit. Then I realize I can hear another person running behind me. That was a comfort for a bit, and I kept looking back to see if I could spot them. Then I hear a laugh and a dog bark, all echoey and shrill. I promptly panic and run. I have 10 kilometers to get to safety from what was now in my mind a hellhound and an axe-wielding murderer. I am now thundering along the track, and I can still hear the person behind me freaking me out worse because I'm running as fast as I can go on a strange track. I get to the end of the track and I come bursting back into the relative safety of car park, panting and gasping for air, and I realize they are going to come out right behind me. I turn and get my breath as best I could and made myself as big and scary as I could, expecting to go toe-to-toe with Freddy Krueger and his pet werewolf. This 1.6-meter girl comes bouncing out of the trailhead with her Labrador and cheerily calls "Great run," and strides like a fucking gazelle across the car park. I think she was using me as a pace setter. Edit, missing word. This story might not count, since it wasn't at work, but I met this girl at my old job, a cute skinny black girl with long curly hair. We got to know each other thanks to a mutual friend of ours and quickly became friends. We frequently went to the park and smoked weed during the lunch break for weeks. One day she wanted me to go to her place, so I did. The first thing I noticed was how empty and dark the place was. The lights didn't work. She had just this tiny lamp that barely casted any light. She didn't have any furniture besides a couch and an old table with 2 chairs. We got into her room to watch some videos in her PC, but I started feeling weird, like anxious and scared out of nowhere. I was not attracted to her, so I wasn't exactly nervous about being alone with her. I asked for the bathroom to take a leak. She pointed to the bathroom door and it was already night and very dark, so I pulled out my cell phone flashlight and stumbled my way through the hallway. Thankfully the bathroom light worked and so I locked the door behind me. When I got into the bathroom the feeling just worsened. I felt this weird evil presence watching me. The bathroom was weird, everything was rusty and full of stains, and stank with the weirdest of smells. I was washing my hands when the freaking door opened, and I don't mean like silently or slowly, but as if someone was about to come in. I froze in place and watched beyond the door, and I just stared blankly into the darkness of the hallway. I got so scared that I snapped back and ran into her room. When I told her about my experience, she just said, "Yeah, that happens all the time here." I was astonished. We left the house to get something to eat, and I swear that I barely touched the door handle when the door just shut loudly by itself. I didn't even bother to mention this to her, but I never went to her place again.